right, here we go. All right, here's the link. I'm putting it in the chat in Zoom. You just mute yourselves here and announce yourself in the chat on YouTube, and I'll see you guys on that side. All right. So first thing I'm going to have you guys do when... All right. First thing I'm going to have you guys do, like I said, is please announce yourself in the chat. Hannah, thank you so much. Yes, there is going to be a slight delay so that you can actually experience the stream as smoothly as possible. It's, we're still only in 2021. They haven't perfected the technology yet. Team Finesse. Oh, shit. I didn't know that was the name of your team. We're still only in 2021. All right. So you guys should be able to hear me. All right, so I see Hannah, see a couple of people. Make sure you, you should be able to hear me. Can everybody hear me? Because I can hear myself when I open up the YouTube channel. Let me know if you guys can all hear me. Cool, good. You're announcing yourselves. Great. You're letting me know you're here. Make sure you can hear me. Mute on Zoom. Y'all mute on Zoom, exclamation mark. Hannah, you can hear my audio, right? Okay, Steven, you can. Tyree, appreciate you. All right, cool, great, awesome. All right, so if you can't hear me, either your volume's down or maybe you have to close Zoom. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, if you can barely hear me, just get out of the Zoom thing and just come back whenever whenever we're done with the lecture. So I'll give you guys a second to figure it out, but this is where the Pro Tools lectures are going to be, and any of the lectures that involve any DAW. So make sure you figure out this system now. All right, so perfect. Yep, if you need to get out of Zoom, get out of Zoom. You can always come back to it because it's going to be the same link for the entire mod. All righty, here we go. So Hannah loves this. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about Pro Tools, right? Pro Tools, as you know, is a DAW, stands for Digital Audio Workstation. It's what we use to record audio. It's what we use to record sound as well as mix and master. All right. Just one more time, if you are still in Zoom, we are on YouTube, and the link to the YouTube is in the chat. All right, now I'm back on YouTube. So, the first thing we do when we open up Pro Tools, the first thing we always see is the dashboard. All right, I'm going to go nice and slow, go keep it super simple, and we're going to get through this. So, the dashboard is where you start to create the session that you want to either record in or mix in, right? So Rerun, I don't know if you got the link, but the link is in the chat. Just be there on YouTube. You can mute yourself here on Zoom. All right, so first thing you see is the dashboard. It's where you can actually name your session, right? It's where you can actually set various parameters up for your session. So for example, you have a name for the session. Let's just call it something basic like intro class. And whenever I create a session, I always label it PT at the end. This is just my personal preference, right? PT just stands for Pro Tools, so that I know that when I see the folder, it's a Pro Tools session folder, which we're going to get into in a second. But this is going to be the name of my Pro Tools session, okay? Next, you see that there are different places where you can actually save the session. You can either save it on a local storage device, which means something physical, a physical hard drive that's present in your system, or you can save it to the cloud. Now, me personally, I don't use the cloud service in Avid to save my sessions. I prefer having them physically with me, right? But just know that you can do a cloud-based save. I don't recommend it, especially when you're starting to learn. Keep it on local storage, okay? Next, you see there's a little checkbox which says create from template. Now, these are all templates, different templates that I use for film restoration, because you can see that it's under post-production. So post-production, anything film related, film restoration related, podcast related, which is, we'll get into, we'll talk about in a different class, but I have different templates for different sessions that I might do, right? And local, yes, external drives all count as local storage, which you'll see in a second. But you have template groups like post-production. You might also have like, hey, for music, I have, these are all kind of Pro Tools stock templates. You have all these different kinds of presets available, right? But I'm not going to use any of those today. So I'm going to uncheck templates so that it's a plain blank session, right? I'm going to rename this class PT, right? Next, we come down here where we choose the file type of our audio files. Now, by default, it'll always be set to WAV files, and that is 99% the case in the sessions that you're going to do. There is another option called AIFF. If you click this little pull down, you'll see that AIFF is another audio format that you can use. Now, both of these formats are what we call lossless audio, which means that they're just high quality, right? Whereas MP3 is lossy, L-O-S-S-Y, right? So we never record or mix or anything in lossy audio. If you do have an MP3, you can bring it into the session, and I'll show you how to do that. But for now, we're going to choose WAV file as our standard file type. Next, you can choose the sample rate at which you're working at. Now, sample rate is basically how many little still shots is your converter going to take to represent the audio in a digital domain. So what do I mean by that? When I'm talking into this microphone, it's an electrical signal that's going down this cable, right? But how do you get an electrical signal into a computer? It's two different things, right? What has to happen is it has to go through something called a converter, which converts from analog or electrical to digital. So you have A to D conversion, analog to digital conversion. And in order to do that, there are different sample rates at which you can do it. There's 44.1, there's 48, there's 96, there's 192, all different kinds, right? If you click here, you'll see that there's different kinds of sample rates. Now, back in the day, because we were using CDs as our distribution, we would always eventually get the master down to 44.1 kilohertz in sample rate and have a 16-bit bit depth. With streaming platforms today, I recommend you go 48K and 24-bit because that's usually what's well accepted across all the different platforms. Now, if it's grayed out, it could be that either you're on the wrong sound card, which means your the device that you're using to interface with your Pro Tools is either not selected, or that your device can't handle anything but the 44.1, in which case stay at 44.1, right? But I will show you in a second how to choose the sound card or how to choose the interface that you're working with. But that's sample rate. And bit depth is the secondary value used to represent your audio in the digital world, right? So I recommend 48 and 24-bit or just 44.1 and 24-bit. Just because of what if it's locked at 48, it might be that your interface can only handle 48, or it means that you have to change your interface settings in a different panel as opposed to Pro Tools. That's what it means when it's locked. It means that your interface is locked into that, and either you have to change the interface settings, either on a panel like this, or if your interface has like a switch or something that you can flip to a different sample rate. So that's what I would recommend. If it says 48, that's fine. 48 is good. 24-bit is good. 44.1 is good, but always try to stay 24-bit. 32-bit, I'm not like a big fan of, and I'm not really that, convinced by it. But so I say 24-bit. Try to avoid 16-bit if you can, but again, it's not the biggest deal in the world between these two. But I recommend 24-bit. I/O settings has more to do with your interface and Pro Tools, and so we're not going to get too much into that. So if you have one, and if you pull down the menu, you should be stereo mix should be fine. Should be the standard one. So 48 external clock, that just means that like your clocking is not happening within your system. It's actually happening within your interface or a clock that you may have set up outside of that. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Next, you have your interleaved option. This has more to do with if you have a multi-channel file. So what does that mean? Well, when I'm talking to you right now, it is a single channel going through the microphone to you guys, right? You can see it over here. It's one channel going up and down, right? The volume's going up and down. That is a mono channel, M-O-N-O, mono channel. When you have two channels that are doing distinct things, have different signals going in at the same time, it's called stereo. And then you guys know that we can expand that to surround sound, right? 5.1, 7.1, LCR, whatever, right? Now, whenever we're dealing with multi-channel files, we can either see them as a single file on your Finder, or we can separate them into their individual channels. This will make a lot more sense when we're bouncing files, when we're actually bouncing and done with mixes. So just for now, if you're not really understanding it, don't worry. It'll become clear slowly but surely. Interleaved just means that when you are working with a stereo file, it is represented as a single file in your Finder, right? Whereas if it was unchecked, then the stereo file would actually be split into two separate files, a left channel file and a right channel file. So it's up to you what you prefer. There's no right or wrong in terms of this particular case. I just leave it as interleaved. Next, we're going to go into where we're going to save this session, right? Organization is a huge part of being an engineer because you have to not only manage how to get good recordings, but you have to be good at file management. Where are the sessions located? Where are the MP3s? Where are the beats? Where are the vocals? Where's everything situated? You have to be good at managing data and knowing how to save things in an efficient and organized manner. If you don't do things organized, you run the risk of getting lost in the mess, looking unprofessional, losing information, losing data, losing records. And if there's any artists amongst you, which I think there were, you can understand how frustrating it can be if an engineer calls you up and says, hey, remember that 5-hour session we did? Yeah, I lost some of that shit. Like, what? That's fucked up, right? What did you do? Why would you do that? Or how did you not manage that? So a big part of engineering, again, is not just pressing record and messing with faders. It's organization, keeping things neat, keeping things organized, keeping things collected and together. So in that vein, we're going to choose a location that I will always be able to know is where my Pro Tools sessions will live, or I'll always be able to access it. I will know exactly where this session is going to live, so that if ever, for some reason, if one of you guys comes up to me on the street 5 years from now and are like, hey, remember that session we did on the very first day? Could I take a look at that? I should be able to say, sure. Why are you asking me? I don't know, but sure, let's fucking do it. I should be able to do that. Because there's going to be scenarios where an artist is going to come back to you. This literally just happened to me 2 weeks ago. A song, an album that I did 2016, 17, 18. So it was like 3 years process to do the full album, right? So they came back to me a few weeks ago saying like, hey, we're doing a live performance, we would love to get the stems of this song, right? Or we would love to get a minus track of this song. I mean, I had it all organized and ready, so it was boom, it was fine. It was easy to go. But if I had not been organized about things, it would have been a pain in the ass, or it would have just looked like I didn't know what I was doing, or unprofessional, or they might even be hesitant to come back to me as a returning client, right? So we want to know exactly where this is going. Me personally, I like to always prompt for location, which means that when I hit create, it's going to ask me, where do you want to save this thing? Now, alternatively, you could go ahead and choose a location and it'll pop up right here. And then when you're done, you hit create and it goes there. I leave it on prompt for location so that I'm never, ever saving it in a place where it doesn't need to be. It's always going to prompt me before it sets up the session. So I prompt for location and I hit create. And next thing it's going to say is, where do you want to save it? Now you can see here that I've got my regular drive, my OS drive, my operating system drive. I never save sessions on my operating system drive. The operating system drive is for your Pro Tools, is for your software, is for your various applications, but not for session data. You need to keep your OS drive as free as possible to do a lot of the processing that it needs to do. Ideally, you want to leave at least 100 gigs on your OS drive free so that it has enough space to do any kind of extra computing, right? So I never save sessions on my local drive. They eat up a lot of space. There's a lot of audio that takes up a lot of hard drive space. And if you start doing that, you'll run out of space really fast, which is why you need to get an external drive. Now, I'm using a super cool USB-C drive by this G Technology company. I'm just going to take this camera, and you can see that it's this thing right here. All right, this is just a regular USB, but this thing is the drive that I'm using. It's nice and small. It's efficient. I can literally carry it in my pocket, and I can take it to sessions wherever I want. Very, very efficient. So I like using that. And it's USB-C, so the transfer speed, the read-write speeds are great. I don't have any lag or latency or any processing troubles. Right? Fingers crossed. Today's the day, right? When I'm doing this fucking intro class, today is the day that it actually fucks up, but hopefully it won't. So I'm going to choose my work drive right over here. So in my work drive, you can see I have a bunch of different subfolders, right? I have stuff for work. I have stuff, just different bands that I work with, a small business that I run, band stuff, and got some personal stuff over here. Then I have a little folder called SAE, which is where you guys are going to come into the picture. I double click that, and I have a bunch of different folders from different modules. I'm going to go ahead and create new folder, and I'm going to call it the name of this mod group, which is 2108W12. When I hit create, it's going to enter into that folder, that subfolder. And within this, I'm going to create a new folder called Pro Tools Sessions. So any session that I do, I want it to live in this folder, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create save, but just before I do, I just want to make sure that I know exactly where this thing is. So it's on my work drive, it's on the SAE, it's on this mod, Pro Tools Sessions, hit save, boom. We have opened up our Pro Tools session. Now before I get into what all this means, and again, don't worry, this is probably going to look like fucking NASA buttons or whatever. But don't worry. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to go to the bottom of my screen where you can see the Finder, right? The Finder is basically the access point to all your different files and folders, right? So if I click on it, it'll open up this little window here. Now, where did I save that session? I saved it on my work drive, under SAE, under 2108, Pro Tools Sessions, and there it is. Intro Class PT. It is the exact name that I gave when I created the session. Now you might be thinking, well, why is it a folder? This is one of the most important things that you need to know about Pro Tools. You will need to remember this for the entirety of your use of Pro Tools. A Pro Tools session is not one file. It's a collection of multiple files and folders all in one umbrella session, right? So that umbrella is actually called the Pro Tools session folder. And this is what you're going to submit for your midterm, for your final. This is what you send when somebody asks you for the Pro Tools session. This is what you send to maybe a producer or mix engineer or recording engineer when they ask for the Pro Tools session, right? It is the Pro Tools session folder. And in it, if you click this little down arrow, is where everything lives. All the audio files related to the session, like anything you recorded, anything you imported, anything that you altered, everything goes in the audio files folder. The bounced files folder, which is where you actually, when you're done mixing, you bounce it or you have a render of it or you export it into the bounced files folder. Clip groups, which we'll get into in a bit, is basically where you can have multiple clips all grouped together to do similar functions, right? Intro class pt.ptx. This is the Pro Tools session file. Now this looks like the thing you would send people because it has the Pro Tools logo, it has the PTX. You might think, oh, let me just send this to my partner or let me just send this to my professor. This doesn't work. This is only the skeleton structure of the session. This alone is useless to most people. However, if you were creating templates, fine, useful. But in the context of sending session data, useless. You have to send the entire folder. Session file backups is basically a place where Pro Tools can automatically create backup files in case your session crashes, in case you lose power, in case you open up a bad plugin, in case you just do something silly, right? Video files, obviously we don't get into video in this mod, but in case you are dealing with video, this is where they would live. And finally, the wavecache.wfm is actually the file that generates all those little colorful waveforms that you see, which you will see when we get into Pro Tools. Let's see, my external drive is saying this when I try to save it. Drive 1 is not an audio playback volume. So that means that either it needs to be formatted or if it's already been formatted, then your read-write permissions are not set correctly. So if I go to my Finder and I right-click on my drive and I say get info, now yours should say that the privilege for anybody really should be read and write. You might have to quit Pro Tools, change this to read and write, and then try again. And if you're still having issues, you might have to contact John Nader about that stuff. But this is probably what it is. And in order to change that, you might actually have to unlock it, which is just using your password. And then you can change it to whatever you want, right? No. I'm going to lock it for now because I don't need it. But that is what I'm thinking the issue is. All right. So now that we have the structure of a Pro Tools session folder gone through, just remember that the entire folder is what makes up the session, not just one thing. So always remember that. So now you can see that there's nothing in the audio files, nothing really there in any of the folders. So let's actually get to do that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Pro Tools. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the layout. There's so many buttons and so many knobs and device and tools that you might see, so many options. You could spend hours trying to go through all of it, which is why I'm not going to. We're going to go on a functional basis, which means like, what do we want to do? Like, what is the goal we want to do? And then I'll teach you how to get there using whatever buttons you see, right? It's pointless to go through every button because not only is it boring, it'll take way too long and you would have learned nothing if it wasn't applied. So let's go ahead and do what we all came here to do in this fucking school and get some music in here. So I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to Import. and then I'm going to go to import audio. Now, really, really important. Do not drag and drop into this session. All right. I know it's kind of lame that you can't do that. You can do it, but I don't recommend it if you want to keep things organized and clean. You'll understand why as you get more into Pro Tools, but don't drag and drop into Pro Tools. Just trust me on this for now. All right. Let's do it the classic way of going to File, Import, and Import Audio. The shortcut to do this is Shift-Command-I. Shortcuts are huge in the engineering world. The more shortcuts you can use, or the faster you are, the more legit you are, the more people will want to pay you because you have efficiency and speed and quality at the same time. So try to learn as many shortcuts as you can. I still don't know all the shortcuts, but I use them a lot and it does help. So instead of going all the way to File, Import Audio, you could just press Shift-Command-I and it opens up the import window. Now in the import window, we can go ahead and find some music. Now, I'm not sure what you guys might even be into, but let's find George Escalante. Let's just see what this is. So, as soon as I click on a WAV file, remember that when we originally made the session, we set the file type to WAV. We also set the sample rate to 48, and we set the bit depth to 24. Now, just because that is the case, I'm actually going to import a different song, something that I know is at 48K sample rate and 24-bit. So if you give me a second to find... Oh, actually, perfect. Actually, we just finished working on this, so this is perfect. Let's see. Yeah. All right. So as soon as I click on the WAV file, right, you can see that a couple of details start to show up. The type is WAV, right? You can see that from the file, but you can also see it down here. It's 3 minutes and something in length. It's about 55 megabytes. The bit depth is 24-bit and the sample rate is 48,000 hertz, which is exactly the settings that I chose for this session, right? 2 channels, which means it's a stereo track. And now it's giving me the option of either adding to the session or copying to the session. This is very, very important. So I'm going to show you right now. I don't know why this thing got created, but okay. All right. So let's take this example of, let's take V2, Far Too High Mix V2, and I'm going to add this one. All right. I'm going to just add it and hit done. And as soon as I hit done, it's going to say, do you want to put the song on a new track or on the clip list? Now, I'm just going to put it to the new track, right? It's giving me a time code, but don't worry about that. You guys probably won't get that. All right, so you see right here that the song is in, right? And you can play it and hear it. Right? And it plays just fine, right? However, what you might not understand is that when you go back to the Pro Tools session folder that I talked about so much, inside the audio files, there's still nothing in here, which is weird because I told you that the folder makes up the entire session and we have a song, so what's the problem? Here's the thing. This audio is being referenced in the original location, right? So this session is always looking towards that original location to get this audio. It's not a bad thing, but what if I send this session to one of you guys? You guys don't have this song. At least I don't think you do. You shouldn't have this song. So when you open up the session, you will get an error message saying that, hey, we can't find this audio file. It's missing. And this is where a lot of sessions start to get fucked up because you didn't copy, you added. I'm going to go ahead and delete this, right? And I'm going to delete it from here. Just remove. And now I'm going to import, but this time I'm going to do V3. And instead of adding, I'm going to copy. All right. Copy, then hit done. Then it's going to say, where do you want to copy it to? By default, it's going to be that audio files folder. So you just hit open. You put it on a new track. And there it is, right? But this time, when I go back to the Finder and I go back to the Pro Tools session folder, which is the core thing or the core part of the thing that you want to send in case you want to send it to anybody. I didn't say that right, but it is the most important part of the session. It's the entire folder because that's what makes up the entire session. It creates the entire session. So you go into that folder, and then in audio files, you'll actually see the file that I imported. It's actually here in the session now, right? So if I drop down, it's right there. So it's always going to be there now. So now if I send you this session, it will always be present in the actual... I think somebody just came. Oh, it's just rerun. All right. It'll always be present in the Pro Tools session folder. So this is the correct way to do it. Whenever you import audio, always copy, or it'll give you one other option to convert, and that's what you want to go with. Never add, especially when you don't understand it fully. Always copy. So for example, if you chose an MP3, it will give you the option to convert because you need to convert from an MP3 to the file format of your session, which is a WAV file. Or let's take the other example of where you have a song at a completely different sample rate, right? So this one has, it looks like it's a rough bounce, but this is at a different sample rate. So because it's at a different sample rate, it doesn't give me the copy option. Rather, it gives me a convert option, which will automatically convert and copy. So that's fine. So we click convert. And as soon as I do, it comes into the clips to import section, but it also gives you the option to apply SRC. SRC stands for sample rate conversion. So if you're at a certain sample rate, you need to convert to another sample rate, then that's how you do it, using SRC. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that checked. Source sample rate is 44.1. So this is the source, right? The destination is 48. That's the Pro Tools session. Now the quality, you can always leave at tweak head, right? There's not much better, and these are not really that much better, to be honest. Tweak head is perfect. But I'm going to go ahead and hit done. It's going to convert and copy into the Pro Tools session folder. And then there we go. It's in there. So I'm actually going to go ahead and move these to the top of the session because mine is kind of set up for film, which is why it's a little different. So there you go. You see both audio tracks. You see both songs here, right? When I'm clicking on these little rectangular boxes, the blue and the green, these are called clips, right? So clips... clips are basically where the audio lives, right? You can see that whenever I click on it, it highlights in the clip list over here. Now, if you don't see the clip list, if you go to the bottom right, you'll see a little arrow pointing outwards right here. So I'm just going to click on this little thing here. It pulls out the clip list. This shows you the different clips that you're dealing with, right? Now, the reason why sometimes this thing pops up is because my mouse is, for some reason, default is kind of fucking up. That's a double click. But when you single click, you should just highlight. You should just have the clip highlighted. But the clips are present in the clip list in case you need to know what all clips are being used in the track. It's good to just have a list of all of them right here. However, if you don't want to see them, you just go ahead and close this one out, and it's gone. Every clip is on a track, right, you can see that this entire row is actually what's called a track. You see that there's a little blue bar here with a name, with some comments, with something called an insert section, as well as your I/O section, which stands for inputs and outputs. But this is essentially a track, and clips live on tracks. All right. So now you can see that I have two different tracks and two different clips. We already saw the clip list view up here. All right. So that we had two clips. Now, if you go to the other side, there's another arrow at the bottom left. And when you click on this, you see your track list, all right, as well as your group list. Now, we'll get into groups later, but for now, just know that you have a track list and a clip list, right? You can have a different clip and a different track selected at the same time because clips live on tracks. All right. So now, what are these tracks for? Well, to do that and to explain that, I need to go into a different view of Pro Tools. Right now, what we're looking at is the edit window, right? So the first thing you want to actually do, how do you set the output to speakers? Silly, but no. There's no such thing as a silly question in this class. We're all here to learn. So this is very basic intro to DAWs and Pro Tools. So ask all your questions, no matter how silly they may seem to you. So first thing you want to do, maybe even before you get into hitting play, is you want to go into this section called the setup section. Under setup, there is an option for what's called the playback engine, and this is where you choose your interface. This might be where you were having issues with your clock before, right? Very, very important. I need to say this up front. If you are using Pro Tools, make sure you have no other DAW open. So make sure Logic isn't open, make sure Fruity Loops or Ableton isn't open, because your sound card can only deal with one at a time. And if you're having troubles even still, it could be that Zoom is giving you the option, giving you the problem, but I highly doubt that because I have Zoom open as well as Pro Tools, so it can pretty much manage it. So here is where you can see that there's an option for playback engine. Mine is set to Universal Audio Thunderbolt. That is the interface that I'm using. Just want to make sure you guys can see it. It's this guy over here. This thing, right? This is the interface that I'm using. It's a 8P. I like it. It's pretty dope. So I choose that as my interface, as my playback engine. And the other important thing about this window is your buffer size. Now, buffer size is basically exactly what you think it is. So whenever you're watching something on the internet and it says it's buffering, all that it means is that it's waiting for enough information to fill up the buffer so that when you see it or when it empties the buffer out, it plays continuously. So if you've ever watched a YouTube video and it gets stuck, basically what's happening is that there are like these computers in all across the world, and they're sending a bunch of picture and audio information to your computer, right? To your internet browser. But they're all coming in like different orders and they're coming at different times. So what happens is right before it hits your screen, there's a little buffer, a little memory space for it to collect and also rearrange into the right order. And then when it's full enough, it passes it through to your screen so that you see it as like a smooth image, right? Or as a smooth video, I should say. Same thing happens with audio, right? When I'm recording something into my DAW, you want to make sure that it's recording smoothly and correctly. When I'm mixing, I want to make sure I'm hearing things correctly and smoothly. And for that, you need to have an inbuilt buffer. Now, general rule of thumb is smaller buffer sizes for recording, larger buffer sizes for mixing and mastering, right? So the standard for recording is about 128. You can go to 56, and if you have a solid system, maybe even more. But for mixing is where you get into 512 and 1024 samples for buffer size. So smaller for recording, larger for mixing. And those are the two most important things in this particular dialog box. Other things just include like making sure that you don't hear any errors in terms of any kind of clocking issues or any kind of processing errors that may occur. And obviously you guys aren't dealing with video, so I have video enabled because of the film work that I do, but you don't have to have that. You can disable that actually if you want to. So I'm going to hit OK. And now that I've selected the correct interface, I can actually go up to setup and then go to the I/O section where you can actually see your inputs, your outputs, and your buses, right? Now, I'm not going to get into inserts or preamps or hardware inserts because those are much more advanced. But the main ones you're going to deal with are input, output, and bus. When I click on input, you can see I have my interface has a bunch of inputs, a bunch of mic line inputs, ADAT inputs, virtual inputs, and same with my outputs, right? And the buses we'll talk about later, but they're basically virtual paths in Pro Tools that connect to different places. So that's where you see your I/O. Again, if this is going over your head, do not worry. As you do it, more will become clear. Now, what you do want to make sure is in your I/O section, and you go to your bus section, you want to make sure that you do have a bus that's actually mapping to your speakers. So my speakers are named monitor left and right. You want to make sure, you want to make sure that you have a bus that's going to that monitor output. Now the bus that I have going to that is named exactly the same as my monitor left and right. I can name it differently if I wanted to. I can double click this and just call it output 1, 2. And output 1 and 2 is what's going to go to my monitor left and right, which is my headphones or my speakers. So when I hit OK now, you'll see that over here, these will change from monitor LR to output 1 and 2. The ones at the bottom will change, I should say. So I hit OK. Boom, right? So whenever you have a track, every track will have an input and an output that you can assign to it. If you don't see this or any of this information, you can go to this little white bar over here, this white kind of box section, and click on the pull down menu, and you'll see that there's a bunch of different options that you can actually choose to see. So as you click them, more will become visible. Right? Now, for my purposes today, I actually only need to use if you want to leave comments, you can say like, good song mixed, good song, no, let's say, song not mixed. George is going to hate me for that. But then you want to make sure that the I/O is visible, because I/O is where you can see what the input to the track is, right? How the track receives signal if you want to record on the track, and how the track is outputting to wherever it needs to go, right? So the input is the one on top, which basically says what is coming into the track. If you're recording, we're not recording anything right now, so I'm not going to go into that. And the output is saying, hey, where is this track sending the signal, right? Output makes sure that it's going to the correct place. So when you click on output, it'll give you the option to either output to a physical place in the world. So I can choose output. Output goes to monitor left and right. That goes to my headphones. Right? Or I can choose output to bus, but that's a virtual path within Pro Tools and I won't hear anything. So you have to make sure that if you have to hear something, it has to go to a physical output, in this case, my headphones left and right. Now, you can see that this track has other options too, but in order for me to go into that a little bit more, I'm going to switch from what's called the edit window. It's called the edit window because this is where you can edit. I'm going to switch from this to the mix window. And I do that by going up to window and clicking on mix. Now you might have seen that there was a shortcut, a very good shortcut to know, right? I'm going to go ahead and expand this. The shortcut to swap between windows is Command equals. So this is the fast, efficient way to swap between windows, right? Edit window, mix window, edit window, mix window. So in the mix window, you can see that the track, both tracks are still here. You can see the comments that I made, right? You can see the ins and outs that we already assigned. You also see these faders, right? The faders are where you actually choose what volume you want to set the track at. And that's why this is called the mix window, because this is where you set the faders for all your different tracks. If you had a legit session, you would see faders for all of the tracks and you'd be able to manipulate them. Okay? So you can also see that there's a couple of other things going on. You can see that each track has a S or solo button, a M or mute button, input monitor for recording, record enable for recording, which we'll get into later, and the pan knobs for panning left and right. So you can make a signal go to your left headphone or your right headphone or somewhere in between those, right? So let's go ahead and just do a simple solo because I just want to listen to one of the tracks right now. We have 2 different songs. I only want to listen to one at a time. So I'm going to go hit solo. I'm going to hit play. Right? You can change the volume. Right? As I pull the fader down, you can see that the volume changes. And as I turn it up, if you pan, it's on one side. Right? So as you do all these different things, you'll see that you can manipulate the sound in different ways. I'm not going to go too much into that, but just understand that that's all I was doing. I was just playing with the fader and the pan. So if I want to listen to the other track, I can unsolo it, and then I can just solo this one. I guess this one doesn't have vocals on it, right? So a couple of things you might have seen. In the first one, you saw levels, but in the second one, when you saw the levels, you saw this light being highlighted. This little thing on top. So what that means is that the signal is too loud and it's reached the point at which Pro Tools cuts it off. That's what we call clipping, right? So there's a point after which the Pro Tools software doesn't understand the level coming in. So as it tries to exceed that level, Pro Tools chops it off at the head. And that's what's called clipping, but it also causes these little clicking sounds that you might hear every now and then. That's one reason for these little clicking sounds. You never want to be clipping in any kind of scenario. You always want to be in a case where you're not clipping so that you don't have any weird distortion or bad sounds coming in. Even though sometimes in today's music it is an aesthetic choice to clip every now and then. But that's kind of like, deep shit. So don't worry about that. Now, another thing you could do is that instead of soloing a track and just listening to that one track, you could mute one of the tracks and just listen to the other one. Right? You can mute the other one. That's good. I thought it had vocals on it, but I guess I was wrong. That's so weird. Don't we have something with vocals? Come on. Lazaro, maybe? Bounce files. I mean, let's see what we got. Convert. It's processing, so it's converting it to 48K. And let's see. All right. Don't worry about that time code thing. That's more of a film-based thing. All right, here we go. This has got to have some vocals on it, right?
Vamos pa la discoteca, yo me visto bien. Evita a tu amiga y no me importa quién. Dentro mi bolsillo nada más bile de 100. Bitches popping bottles, I'm just bullying my friend.
This is a student from the last class. There's a lot of talent in this SAE, man. It's like, definitely I could see it, you know, progressing and building and going places. So yeah, I hope you guys are ready for some cool final shit. So there you go. You got some solo buttons, you got mute, and you have pan, right? Now you can see that in all these cases, we're using stereo tracks because these are songs. These are songs that have two distinct channels, a left and a right side, right? And that's why when you go to your, when you go to your Finder and you go into your Pro Tools session, into your audio files, you'll see that even though they're stereo, they are represented in Finder by one file. So both channels are within that single file. And that's because when we created the session, we had interleaved checked. If we didn't have interleaved checked, you would actually see like far too high mix v3 dot left as one file and then a dot right as another file. So it's kind of up to you of what your preference is, and for different purposes, you might have different reasons. So for example, most of the time when we're doing music, and it's always interleaved, right? One file, you send the artist one file so that they can listen to it, right? Whereas when you get into film, we generally deliver files as separated channels. So if I'm working on a 5.1 movie, right? I wouldn't send them just one file interleaved. I would send them a dot left, a dot center, a dot right, left surround, right surround, sub, right? All separate files so that then they can encode it into their 5.1 system. So again, that's kind of like we're getting into Mod 4 territory, but just understand that that's what interleaved means. All right. So got a couple of songs here. That was vibey, even though I can't speak Spanish. Right. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and delete some of these. So if you want to delete a clip, actually, before I do that, I'm going to just delete these and just work with one track at a time because you guys are new to the thing. All right. So you have a track in here, right? You have the clip, which is on the track. You can give it a different name if you want by just double clicking it. When you double click it, it gives you the option to rename the track. So I'm just going to call this song. So now the track name is song, but the clip name is still Far Too High Mix V3, right? So a track and a clip can have different names as well. Now, if you want to start manipulating any kind of audio or clip in Pro Tools, we got to start talking about the basic editing. So if you want to use the most common version of editing tool, it's called the Smart Tool, but it is actually a combination of 3 separate tools right up here in the top left corner, right? So you can see that there's a trim tool, there's a selector tool, and there's a grabber tool, all right? Now you can see that when I select the grabber tool, I can hover over a clip, and I can click and move it around the way I want, right? If I have a selector tool and I hover over the clip, I can only select different ranges. And why would I want to do that? I could select a range and then press delete and it would just disappear, right? And I'm just going to press Command Z to undo that. Shortcut, Command Z. And finally, the trim tool, which is where if you hover over the clip, you'll see a bracket show up. And if you click, you can trim clips down, right, on either side. Now, this is all great to have these three tools, but in order to go in between them is kind of a pain in the ass, right? You always have to come back up here, and it's kind of a pain to go back and forth all the time. There's two ways you can get around this. One, which is the shortcut to switch between them, which is Command 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So really it's 2, 3, and 4 that we're using. But me personally, I like to go and click on the bar that's connecting all three of them. You see this little space on top. If you click on it, it enables what's called the Smart tool. All right. So the Smart tool is really cool because you have all three tools within one cursor. And how do I know which tool I'm using? It's pretty simple. Whenever you're on the upper half of a track, right, you can see that I'm on the top half. If you see like a little middle line over here, when you're at the top, you're in selector mode, which means you're selecting. When you're at the bottom, you're in grabber mode, which means you're grabbing. And when you're at the ends is when it turns into the trimmer bracket, which is where you trim. So you have the functionality of all these different tools within a single cursor. That's why I love it so much, right? So I personally like to do the selector tool because then it's really easy for me to, in one go, trim, highlight, select, grab, move, right? Very easy, very efficient, right? Just going to Command Z to undo. So I like the selector tool. There's obviously other tools that you see here, but as I said, we'll get into them a little bit later, but don't worry about them. These are the three primary ones that we're going to use. Now, in order for me to show you different editing techniques, it will be good for me to know the tempo of this song. So first of all, let me go through some things. What I just explained right now with these three tools are called editing tools, but there's a couple of different editing modes on the left corner over here, right? So these are editing modes. These are editing tools, okay? So there's, really 4 different modes that you're going to work with in terms of any Pro Tools audio related thing. But in terms of music, you're primarily going to be in grid mode or slip mode. And you may do shuffle if you understand how it works. But it's going to be primarily grid or slip mode. So what does that mean? Well, in order to do that, I'm actually going to find out what the tempo of this song is, and I should have already written it down at some point when I did the session. So let's go ahead and find that. I must have written it down. Maybe I didn't. I think it was like 143 or something. But you know what? This might be a good time for us to figure out how to do tempos. Now, unfortunately, tempo doesn't get automatically detected in Pro Tools, which is a real pain in the ass. There are certain software out there that will help you, like Mixed in Key. And I know Hannah's probably shaking her head right now saying, like, Ableton does that shit on its own. And I know what you mean. But Pro Tools doesn't, so we're stuck right now. So what we got to do is, first, we have to actually bring up the tempo ruler. So to do that, instead of this white little box over here, there's a black box right above it where you can click and choose what meters you want to see. I want to see the tempo ruler, and I also want to see bars and beats. Next thing I'm going to do is, right at the top, you see the counter, right? Now you might be wondering, why does it say 50 minutes? Okay, this is all film related, so don't worry about that. Instead, I'm going to change it from time code. I'm going to change it to bars and beats, right? You can see the session in different ways, in minutes and seconds, in samples, in frames, in time code, but bars and beats is probably what you're going to be using a majority of the time. Minutes and seconds you might want to do, but probably not. So bars and beats. So now we know whenever we put our cursor anywhere, whenever we put it in selector mode and we click in one place, the cursor moves. I'm sorry, the cursor moves to that location. All right. So that will actually tell you where the song is going to start playing from. So if I put my cursor here and I press play, plays from there. Whereas if I go here and I hit play, different place in the song. So you can choose where you want to listen to the song from, right? So now we're going to do a couple of things. First thing we're going to do is, as I move the cursor, you'll see that this counter starts to move as well, right? Because it's wherever I place the cursor is where the counter reads. So for example, if I want to go to bar 9, beat 1, I click on bar 9, beat 1, and it says bar 9, beat 1, 0 ticks. And all right, we'll get into ticks later. Next, we're going to increase the size of this track because it's kind of small right now and I want to see it larger. If I click on this little ruler over here, this little gray area, I can click and change the size to something a little bit more substantial, right? Or I can come to the bottom of a track where my cursor, or my mouse, sorry, will change to this little up and down arrow. I can now click and enlarge it to wherever I want. So let's keep it at, let's do extreme. Fuck it. Now we're going to have to figure out the tempo. In Pro Tools, it's a huge pain in the ass, in my opinion. It doesn't automatically detect tempo very well. So what you can do is you can click and play the song, but then open up the tempo edit tool. So you can see right here, we actually see the tempo and we see this little triangle over here where the tempo actually starts, and you see that it's 120, which is the standard for any DAW, right? If you click the little pull down, you'll see that there's a tempo map, but we're not going to get into that right now. Yeah, I know the tempo detection thing is kind of one of the not so good things about Pro Tools. Remember, I'm going to say this again, but like Ableton, Logic, Fruity Loops, they're way more geared towards the producer, songwriter, creative people. And Pro Tools is like a hardcore engineer's DAW. Like we're talking like nuts and bolts, black and white, you know, just raw. So that's why some things are not as intuitive in Pro Tools as those other DAWs, right? So there you go. So in order to actually edit the tempo, we can double click this little triangle and it'll give you the option to change the BPM, right? So maybe it's 140 or whatever. We don't know yet. Next, we need to actually have a point of reference to know what tempo is 140 or what is 140. To do that, we need to create what's called a click track. All right. It's also not as cute. Yep, I agree with that too. Yeah, Ableton's cute. Logic is cute. Fruity Loops, that was one of my first DAWs, but I never got into it. But Pro Tools is definitely a little bit more like raw. Yeah. So let's create a click track. So if you go to track and you go to the bottom, say create click track, it will create a new track with the click on it. And actually, if you go to the mix window, you'll see there's a click insert or a plugin, which we'll get into later, but it's there on the track. So I'm just going to mute this song for a second and just listen to the click track. So check this out. All right, that's your standard click track. And this, what we're listening to, this speed is 140. So if the song is at this speed, then we know that this is the correct tempo, okay? Right. Now, we need to be able to listen to the click and the track at the same time. So I'm actually going to go in and just reduce the volume of the track in case it's too loud. And then we're going to go ahead and find the tempo. So I'm just going to hit play. So it's not the correct tempo. So I'm going to play and double click this triangle to actually open up the edit window. And then when I when I tap the letter T, it will change according to how fast I tap the tempo. So I think it's like 143 or something. Or maybe not. I'm going to mute the click track so I don't have to listen to that thing. So it's like around 148. Yeah. So it's at 148 tempo, and it is not a standard 4x4 measure. It is actually a 7/8 measure. So that's fine. It doesn't really matter. But the reason why I wanted to get the tempo is because I wanted to make sure that the grid behind it was locked in, or rather the clip was locked into the grid. Now, what do I mean by that? So when you go further in, when you zoom into any kind of DAW, you'll see these little lines that are present, right? There's some blue lines, and then there's some lines in between. Now, in order to zoom in, there's two ways you can do it. You can either press Command plus, Command bracket, right bracket, and Command left bracket to zoom out. But the easiest way to do it is to press the letter T to zoom in and R to zoom out. Now, if it's not zooming in and out, you have to actually enable the shortcut keys in the edit window. And to do that, right over here in the right corner, there's a little AZ. These are the hotkeys for your edit window. Now, like I said, shortcuts are the key to being fast in Pro Tools, right? So make sure that this is highlighted yellow. When you have that, you can zoom in by pressing the letter T, and you can zoom out by pressing the letter R. So now you can see that there is a grid from what's up, John? This is Jonathan. Good to hear from you, man. Why are you fucking in this class? Aren't you in Mod 4? You got bored with Mod 4, so you come back to hang out with us? Fuck yeah, dude. So you see that there's a grid system, right? You see that there's blue lines, which indicate the top of bars, and then you see the subdivisions for those bars. Now, again, if you know anything about music theory, you'll understand that if you're in a 4x4 setting, you'll have 4 subdivisions per bar, right? Again, we do this because it's helpful to understand where the music actually lies, right? So for example, if I wanted to cut this song at some point, let's say, suppose I wanted to just start right here. I wanted to cut the entire intro off, right? I just wanted to start with the vocals. What I could do is, since I'm in grid mode, I can get rid of everything to the left of this exact grid, right? This exact grid line over here. To do that, I have a couple of different options. I can either use the selector tool, right? So I click on the upper half of the track, not the lower half because that's grabbing, but the upper half. I click and highlight the bars that I want to get rid of, and then I just hit delete. So now when I hit play, it will start with the vocals, right? That's one way I could do it. Or what I could do is I could go to the very ends to the trimmer tool, click, drag it all the way to that bar. Same thing happens, right? Song starts right away with the vocals. Yeah, finding tempo is a real pain in the ass. Again, the hard way to do it is actually by doing it in Pro Tools, and the easier way to do it is by using Mixed In Key. But basically all I did was I hit play, I double clicked on the tempo up here, and then I just tapped the letter T according to the tempo of the song, right? So watch this. The tempo is this. It'll come in a second. Dot, dot, dot. Or let's do double. Dot, 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 dot. Oh, you can't even do double because it's 7/8. Dot, 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 dot. Right, so as I'm singing the ta 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 ta, I'm tapping the letter T. So you have to tap with the tempo, and Pro Tools will give you an approximate, and then you have to kind of adjust from there. So it's a little bit of a pain, but if you know the tempo already, it's way easier, which is why whenever you bring songs into Pro Tools, it's always good to know the tempo so that you can get it on the grid right from the bat. Once you do this, if you have this question again tomorrow when we're on campus, just ask me and I'll show you. It's way easier when I show you in person, but try this with any song that you have. You're not going to get a super accurate tempo the first time, but the more you do it, the more you'll start to understand where the tempo actually lies. And a little quick tip, if you do figure out a tempo and it sounds right, always check the top of the song and the end of the song, because it shouldn't be any variation if it's a fixed tempo song, right? So it should be the same. Right? So it's correct at the end of the song and the beginning of the song, which means there's no deviation from the tempo. So it is 148. So I know it's a little bit of a pain, but that's why we get, usually in recording studios with Pro Tools, they'll have a software called Mixed in Key. Now, I don't know if I actually have that. It's on my old system, but yeah, I don't have it with me on this system. So there you go. It actually worked. I was doing it the long way where I find out the downbeat and find it from the, oh, awesome. Awesome. That's great, dude. Oh, it's really good to hear. Good shit. So there you go. You have the selection and delete method. You have the trim method. And then there's one other way I want to show you, which is to split a clip or to cut a clip. Wherever you put your cursor, if you press the letter B, it will clip it or split it into two separate clips, right? So the letter B is actually the shortcut to split. Now again, this only works when you have the AZ highlighted in the top right corner. If you don't have that highlighted, B actually does not cut, and you would have to use the other shortcut, which is Command E, right? But supposing you do have A and Z, you can just press the letter B. You can just press the letter B, and it cuts the clip into two separate clips. And then you can highlight the one you don't like, hit delete, and there you go. You're starting from the vocals again, right? So just little editing things that you can do whenever you start to get an idea for the song. Now remember, in this whole time, I was actually on grid mode. I don't know if you noticed. I changed it for a second for the other thing, but I was primarily on grid mode, right? And that's because when I'm on grid mode, wherever I click my cursor or wherever I move my clip or trim my clip, it will always lock in to the grid. So I don't know if you can see, but I'm going to click and drag. You see how it's not doing anything until it reaches the next grid line, right? It's going to always lock into that grid line. Now, that grid line might be too much. So how do you change the grid line? Well, first of all, right up here where it says grid is actually where you activate the grid. Like if it's off, then you don't see anything. And when it's on, you see the grid lines, right? One more time. No grid, grid. No grid, grid. No grid, grid. And right next to that is the division of the grid. So you can click and you can say quarter notes, or if you want to get smaller divisions, you can say eighth notes or 16th notes, whatever you want. If you do eighth notes, then you can see that the divisions become smaller. 16th notes, they become smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So that's one way you can change the division. So instead of doing quarter notes, which is really big jumps, you can do eighth notes, which is slightly smaller jumps, or 16th notes, which are even smaller, etc., etc. Now, there might be cases where you don't want to even go from grid to grid. You need to go even finer than that. You need to make changes within the actual grid line. That's where you want to go to what's called slip mode. Slip mode allows you to operate in between the grid lines. So you can see that even when I click somewhere, I can click anywhere, not just on the grids, right? So in grid mode, I can only click between. Doesn't matter where I click, it'll always land on a grid. Whereas slip mode, it will always land wherever I click it. So you might be wondering, well, why don't you just stay in slip mode all the time? Well, slip mode is when you want to get really accurate and really kind of fine precision. But grid mode helps you to lock in and make sure that you don't cut off something off the beat or the song that you don't want to cut off, right? If I'm in slip mode, there's a chance that I could either start too early, right? There's a little piano sound right before it, or start too late. Got cut off, right? So again, slip mode and grid mode are your two primary modes that you want to go into. Now, you probably already saw right there is that if you have a clip in Pro Tools, Jesus, that's getting annoying. If you have a clip in Pro Tools, you can go to the top left corner, and if you're on the Smart tool, your mouse will change into a black and white box. The white top half, the gray, black bottom half. This little box over here. And if you click and drag to the right, you'll actually do a fade in. Now, a fade in is a swell in volume. So check this out. Right? So it's kind of gradually building up as opposed to what it was before. It was right off the top. Same thing, when you go to the end and go to the top right corner, your mouse will change into another black and white box. Click, drag to fade out, right? So you know what a fade out is the volume swells down or becomes quieter. So let's do that in a portion where you can actually hear the difference. So what if we just did this? Instead of ending like this, right? Instead of ending like that, we could go to the top right, click, drag all the way, and create a fade. Right? So fade out is a decrease in volume. Now the cool thing about fade ins and fade outs, right, I'm just going to draw some random ones, is that in Pro Tools, you can go ahead and put your put your mouse around the middle area of the fade in or fade out, and you can click and change the curvature of that fade. So you can make the fade faster. You can already hear the volume going down, right? Or you can make it slower. So make it woo all the way like that. You can curve it in all these different ways. Now the other thing you can also do is that if you use your grabber tool and grab the actual fade, one, you can delete it just by hitting delete and it will only get rid of the fade and not the actual clip. Or you can press Command F to open up the fade box. This allows you to change from what's called equal gain or a linear fade to a equal power gain or an exponential fade. Again, different purposes for both of these. Equal gain is good when you want a very a linear type of sound where it's like mathematically smooth. However, since our ears don't work on mathematical precision, exponential is always a good way to go. But again, it's always dependent on the situation. For example, when I'm editing vocals or when I'm comping vocals, I am most of the time using exponential crossfades, right? Whereas if I'm doing like soundtracks and I need to fade one into the other, sometimes I use linear fades. So understanding them really comes down to listening and understanding how they feel. But just know that you can do them. So if you select the actual fade by using the grabber tool, remember you go to a fade, you go to the bottom, grabber tool, press Command F. That'll open up this little dialog box. And you can either click and drag to change this, or you can choose equal power and change that, or you can choose S-curve, which is a little bit different, but whatever you choose, it will reflect in the actual Pro Tools session. All right. Cool. So the last thing I want to show you, and we can take it back to Zoom, is the crossfade, right? So we did a fade in and we did a fade out. We did some trimming, did some selecting and deleting, did changing of fades, did grabbing. Now I want to show you where if you have two separate clips, right? So in this case, let's just take a random clip. I'm just going to delete this. I'm going to delete that. So I have two separate clips. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they mean in this scenario. But if I have two separate clips and I want to join them and fade them into each other, I do that by using what's called a crossfade, right? So what I do is I have two clips that meet in the middle or meet at their respective ends. I make sure that the Smart tool is on, and then I go to the very bottom of the actual meeting point, and then you can see that a little black and white box comes up, but it looks a little different from the other two times, right? Now, if I click and drag this to the left or the right, it creates what's called a crossfade. Now, you can see that mine is defaulted to where it's set up as an exponential crossfade, but yours will probably be set to linear, right? So what does that mean? Let's check it out. Let's listen to this transition from one clip to another. Right, so that's a interesting point. So let's do this. So this is the transition now. So it's a pretty immediate transition. What I can do is I can go to the bottom, click, and crossfade, and create what's called a crossfade. So now it sounds like this. One fades out as the other fades in. You'll hear it. Right? You can hear one clip bleed into another. Now, another clearer way of hearing that is let's take two completely different songs and fade them in, right? So let's do this into this. Fade. I'm going to do linear because that's probably what yours is defaulted to. And let's do that. Right? Sorry, that's a cool song, yeah. All right, so there you go. You heard how it transitioned from one to the other. So that's what's called a crossfade, right? And again, just like any other fade, if you go to around the center part, you can click and start dragging them to alter the fade, or you can go to the bottom, use the grabber tool to click. You can delete it from there, or you can press Command F and change it here, whatever you want, right? All kinds of different ways you can manipulate sound. This is the cool thing about Pro Tools is as much as I said it's kind of a pain in the ass if you're like more of the creative type, it is extremely efficient when it comes to engineering nitty gritty things. There's so much you can do, so many different options of manipulating sound. It's fantastic, right? So there you go. That is a basic intro to Pro Tools. Now we did cover a lot of things. So for now, I'm going to stop and we'll revisit this on Wednesday, but let's take it back to Zoom for now.